G'day guys, this is Rob from Troutlore.com.au, Australia's fly tying specialist store. Today we're tying the Sexy Walt's in a pink combination. For those of you who don't know, the Walt's worm is a very effective little grub pattern that was created back in 1984 by Walt Young in Pennsylvania. It's a very simple fly, basically a hare's ear dubbing and a bead on a jig hook designed to work like a cranefly or a caddis grub. Later on, that's been adapted and it's been changed into the newer Sexy Walt's, which adds a little bit of flash in the ribbing and a hot spot at the top. So let's get started. We are coming in with a Goulburn steel 5230 hook in size 14, and to that we're adding a slotted tungsten bead in the pink. This is the size 3.2 mil or 1/8 of an inch. We're going to slide that up and then come in behind that with some medium Veniard lead wire. We want to ensure that this bead sits the right way around. So there's two ways you can have it with that slot. You'll see there it sits forward and up, whereas if we rotate it around, it wants to sit further back and shows more of that eye. So we want it sitting forward and up like so to put the weight balance off center to help flip this fly over. Then we're going to come in with our lead wraps. I'm just going to put 3 or 4 wraps in and then trim that off. Make sure that bead's oriented right. Slide that right in. Trim out the rear. If we put too much more in, it can affect the taper shape. So I don't like to run it too far down the hook shank as such. Just that little extra to help it sink a little bit faster and help with the tapering slightly. Then we're coming in with the Fly Smith 52 Denier thread in the very bright hot pink color. Here we'll start just behind those lead wraps. Get that thread caught in, trim out the tag, and then we'll start making wraps over the lead in behind the eye. Just bulk up that little bit of a gap between the lead and the bead, and then cross wraps over the lead to make sure it's locked in place, and then come to the rear of it and we'll just work a little bit on that taper. You don't have to worry too much about it. It's going to get covered up with the dubbing, but at that stage it just helps even that out slightly. Then we'll bring our thread down to just shy of the hook bend and we're in with our next material. We're tying in the ribbing now. For this you can use any number of flash products you like. We're using Upavon Blizzard Flash in the pearl. In that pack you can see there's white and pearloid strips. We're going to ignore the white ones and take out one of the pearl strips, which has a lovely UV glint to it. Then we'll capture that on the near side of the hook shank. A couple of wraps up to lock it into place, then bring our thread right down to the end of the bend, placing that pearl mylar out of the way. The final material is the dubbing, which builds up our body. For this you can use any number of hares or possum dubbing if you like, or squirrel dubbing. The original called for hare's ear dubbing, something like the Hareline Dubbin there. The Sexy Walt is generally tied with something a little bit more flashy, so we use the hare's ear plus, which is hare's ear with some antron in there for that little sparkle. So before going ahead, we're just going to put some dubbing wax on our thread. We want to create a nice fine noodle for this. We don't want to bulk it up too much because we are trying to achieve a nice carrot shaped taper to this fly. We want it very thin at the rear and moving forward to evening out the size with the bead at the front. So we'll start off with a fine noodle, wrap forward of the bend until we chew up that excess thread. Then we'll come back and wrap right to the bend and then start wrapping forward from there. And now we just need to build up our taper as we go. The beauty of doing this with the pink thread or with an orange thread is that when this fly gets wet, some of that thread starts to show through the dubbing. It gives it more of that, well, kind of shrimp look. So here we just continue wrapping forwards, building that taper. We're going to get to the front. I want to put a little bit more in there. Just to ensure it doesn't collapse when we wrap our ribbing over it. And then we'll end with the thread behind the bead like so. At this point, I'm going to take my longer scissors and I'm going to trim off this dubbing. Now I know you're all going to say, hang on, we're using Hare's Ear or Hare's Ear Plus because of all those lovely long guard hairs that give it that real buggy look. But I want to trim this down, A, to emphasize the taper, so when the fish sees the silhouette, they see the taper and the shape, but also to increase the sink rate. We don't want too much sticking out that will actually slow it down. What you'll find as you fish this, those fibers are going to start breaking free anyway, and it's going to become more scruffed up. So you'll end up with a fly that is scruffier and is going to have a slower sink rate. You can then swap out to a freshly trimmed one like this, or leave the scruffier one on, depending on which is going to work better for the water you're fishing. Now we'll take our ribbing and start making open spiral wraps up the body, just biting into that dubbing as we go. And one more, and then we'll finish right behind the eye. We'll take one wrap behind that flash, one wrap in front, one behind, another one in front, and then we can trim that off nice and close. At this stage, I'm just going to put the tiniest bit of extra dubbing on the thread there and just bulk that up behind the collar. I am not a fan of nymphs that have a neck to them as such. I want that taper going all the way up. So I'll rebuild that, give it a trim for those excess scruffy bits, and then we can start wrapping in that hotspot collar so that it hasn't become too narrow just behind the bead. Once we've wrapped in half a dozen or so wraps, we'll take our whip finisher and put in a couple of 3 or 4 turn whip finishers. Always difficult doing this when working around the camera. There we go. Lock that in place, trim off the excess, and then to finish this off, we're going to come in with some Upavon Crystal Coat UV resin. I'm just going to get a little bit on my bodkin and basically fill in that slot in the bead. That will come back over the thread and lock that off, and we'll finish out the shape nicely. We then take our UV torch, seal that off. You can see that thread glows under the UV light. And you can also see some of those straggly fibers that kick out. once we turn that off, that is it. There you have it. That's the Sexy Walt's. It's the flashier version of the original Walt's wormfly, tied on a jig hook so it rides hook point up. A great Euro style nymph that is heavily used in competition fly fishing and catches a lot of fish, but you can use it with any rig, including as a standard dry dropper nymph. So thank you for watching. As always, the materials list for this fly is down there in the description. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and make sure you tie yourself up a few. As always, thanks for watching and happy tying.